Our next presenter is Mike Houlihan. He is the curator of birds at the Audubon Zoo. Today, he's going to be talking about Taxa specific for Psittacines.
All right. Good morning. Um, Thank you all for being here. Thank you for USDA for hosting and allowing me to come and talk to you all. Yes, my name is Mike Houlihan. I am the curator of birds for the Audubon Zoo here in New Orleans. Um, I am going to talk specifically about parrot taxa, the Psittacines, and enrichment for them. A little different from maybe some of the other things that we had yesterday, the great talks that were there, that I'm not going to go into exactly what enrichment is. I believe we all have somewhat of an understanding on that, or do any definitions of enrichment. But I am going to talk specifically about the use of natural behavior as a guideline for enrichment. So a little further on in the presentation, I have picked out four distinct species of parrots and cockatoos and their kin, and I'm going to talk about their natural behaviors and how you can utilize that as something to either guide or help shape your enrichment plans for those specific animals. So we know that these are very complex animals with very big social structures. So enrichment can be very complex as well too. And a lot of times, keepers will find themselves or caretakers will find themselves questioning where to start or how to get ideas for it. And that's where I believe natural behavior can come in to help you design those programs. Okay, there we go. I do have control. All right. Oh, went too far. See if I can go back. Well, the last slide, if I can't go back, was just kind of giving, there we go, a list of types of enrichment that we're all very familiar with, but I want to talk a little bit about some of them on this list as how they would apply to this tax of Psittacines. Obviously, we know that they are very social animals. They have very complex social hierarchies for some of them. But this is where learning natural behavior comes into play. Are these a large group of parrots? Are they a small group? Are they a pair group? So finding out the natural history will help you design those enrichment programs based on how you, based on how you deal it with in a flock or a social setting. Foraging is another one. We all know that food is a very important and very handy tool to have when working with enrichment for parrots. Are they canopy foragers? Are they ground foragers? Where in the forest are they looking for the food can help you shape where you're going to place your enrichment. Is it something they need to climb and clamor for? Is it something that is, low to the ground and hidden underneath leaf litter or, whatever item you might be using? Variety or choice of control is a very big deal as well, too. These animals are going to be utilizing a number of different things out in the wild. And if you run out of ideas, doing a deep dive into their natural history and the research and literature that is out there about them can, of course, help guide you or give you those ideas for coming up with a much more big variety or a larger variety of items that we're looking at. Training, a lot of people will think training sometimes is separate from enrichment, but for this taxa, I believe training can be enrichment as well too. So if you're doing flights like A to B is, even scale training or crate training, those are excuse me, those are things that you can work into into your enrichment plan. And the question could be, well, what are the behaviors that we are looking for? Again, going back to that wild or natural behavior, that may give you that answer there. Being creative, we need to come up with that variety. And again, this is natural history, or studying that is a way to find that creativity. You may come across research from, that is very new or from many years ago that will tell you this bird in particular did this thing in the wild ones. Hey, that's a great idea. We could utilize that for enrichment now. And then we also have learned through research that parrots do have a color preference. So those are things that you can utilize for your enrichment as well. Brightly colored items, even items that may not look as natural, but can be used, to kind of inspire that enrichment. Different colors may elicit different behaviors. And then staying inspired is always a good way to, and reading up on all the literature, all the information that you have on a particular species is going to help you out with that. So let's see. Okay. So a couple things we know about parrots. We know that they are highly social, so those are indicators that you can utilize for building your collection planning. Do we need multiple species? Do we need conspecifics? Can we house multiple varieties of, say, macaws, as many people have seen, together, even if they are different species? Is that enriching for that animal? And then if it's a singly housed animal, we mentioned a lot of that just before, is that animal going to be enriched socially with dealing with people, training, learning those aspects? Uh, Again, and that goes back to studying them. We know that there are species of parrots out in the wild who have numbered in about 74,000 of these burrowing owls were discovered in Argentina. That is one of the largest flocks ever recorded. And then you have things like cockapoos who are mostly solitary from New Zealand. Obviously, most people aren't going to have burrowing owls or cockapoos, but finding out which species you're working with and its social setting out in the wild is going to be very important. We know that these animals are very intelligent, so complex um, forms of enrichment, ever-changing puzzle feeders, things of that nature are going to be very important as well too. I have destructive inchewers there. Most people look at that as something negative, but I think it actually could be a positive for animals that are chewing in, excavating nest cavities, or breaking off sticks and branches for nest building or part of their copulation rituals. So those are things that we know about these animals in the wild, that they have these habits. We could see them in captivity as well, and again, change their enrichment or utilize that, work around that to help provide them the best enrichment as possible. Anybody who's worked around parrots and has gone deaf knows that they are very vocal. They have very loud vocalizations, and that's something that you can utilize as well too. We talked about having parrots within earshot of other parrots and the ability to hear each other. Playing recordings, may be beneficial as well too for an auditory type of enrichment. Now, the last three, aggression, anxiety, and boredom, we know are things that can happen to them if we're not enriching them properly. And again, this is stuff that we know from a lot of the captive animals that people house. They can get bored, and that, of course, can lead to aggression towards their caretakers, which is why I have parrot trust issues. One of the worst bites I've ever gotten was from a cockatoo. And then, of course, anxiety and their psychological health, plucking and so forth can lead to a downfall in their well-being. So those are all things that we know because they're a highly intelligent species that we need to look out for as we plan their enrichment and plan their well-being. So if I can move on. All right. So just a couple examples of things to think about when you're considering natural history and the wild behaviors for enrichment. First off, you're going to want to consider what species you are working with. If you have the ability to do collection planning and pick and choose which species you would like, I suggest doing a huge deep dive into as much literature as possible. I don't have examples for them here, but there's plenty of available literature out there on that particular species or parrots in general. But knowing what you're starting with is important. A lot of times if you are gifted one or it's a rescue, you don't have control over that species. Again, that literature is still out there. So even after the fact, you can go and do the research and find out as much information as possible on their natural behavior. There's a few in here that are somewhat repetitive, so I'm going to go through these a little quickly. Knowing their habitat or home range, where they come from, again, can provide you with ideas for enrichment. What types of trees, what types of perching are available, what types of water features. Is it very moist and rainy, such as rainforest? Is it dry or arid? Things like that are all considerations for that. What's their diet? Obviously, a big one. What types of food are they going to eat? We may not have the availability of the food that they have out in the wild, but we can find analogs and uh, items that are very similar nutritionally as well as palatable for the animal in your supermarkets or your grocery vendors and so forth. So looking into the diet of them and studying what they eat in the wild will help you kind of, again, plan enrichment around any food items. Nesting behaviors as well too is something to look at if you are going to utilize animal's natural nesting behavior, courtship behavior, finding out what they do in the wild is going to be extremely important. Are they obviously over parrots? There's a lot of overlap with things like cavity nesters. Most of them are, but are there exceptions? Are there ones that aren't? Are there ones that prefer a certain type of tree or a depth of nest? Again, all that information is available out there from researchers, and it's extremely important and would be very helpful. What type of material do they use to line the nest with? Wood chips, sticks, things of that nature are all items that you can start to roll into your enrichment program. All right. Again, how social are they? And I think I have a follow-up on that. One is just what are their flock sizes? So again, considering the species, are they, we're going to touch on this when I talk about very specific species, but are they largely social? Are they more pair social? Those are things you'll need to know so you're not either restricting them from being social or overloading them with annoying neighbors that they don't want. So again, just doing that, looking at that research. And then, of course, we talk about goal-based enrichment. What is the goal? What natural behavior are you looking for? What are you trying to elicit from that animal? And where can you start to write that plan in? See? Right. And then just the overall question and kind of the thought of this talk is what can you utilize? How can you utilize their natural behaviors um, and physical traits to enrich them? Are they a species that is going to climb a lot? Do they need a climbing structure? Do they use their feet and beak? How do they get around? Do they prefer flying? So whatever it is that you were thinking about as far as your enrichment goes, I think a very key component is to look at what their natural behaviors are in the wild so that we can replicate that as best we can and give those animals the best quality of care. And then, of course, what is safe and what's not. There's a lot of items that don't come naturally in rainforests, such as a lot of plastic toys and colorful puzzle feeders and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about the end as to what is safe and what's not, and give you a couple of examples of things that you can or you should or shouldn't use or things to avoid. And again, very species specific, but there is an overall theme for most of this taxa. All right. So we're going to jump into our first species. We're going to talk a little bit about the Moluccan eclectus. This is a mid-sized parrot, and these are from islands in the South Pacific. Um, Very beautiful bird, seen a lot in zoo collections, sometimes in private collections as well too. So again, just going to go through some natural behaviors, natural history of this animal, and then from there we can extrapolate out to what enrichment items or what enrichment plans we can come up with. So a little information about them, as they are from the Molucca Islands. They are found in lowland and hill forest and considered habitat generalists, which means they're also found around human populations. Habitat generalist is a good kind of word for planning on enrichment. You can give them a variety of different perching. You can give them a variety of different ways of getting around, and they seem to adapt fairly well to it. So if you are planning on enriching the environment itself, you can take those notes from its natural history that it is comfortable just about anywhere. Again, going back to the parrots with color preferences, these are sexually dimorphic. The green ones are the males, the reds are the females. So you could possibly include different colors in your enrichment, a variety of colors to entice enrich those animals. Sorry, uh, because again, these are obviously an animal that goes a lot by the colorations of feathers. They are cavity nesters in trees, high up in trees. So consider the size of this animal. They're a mid-sized parrot. Do we need something very large? Do we need something small? Um, Very interesting thing about them is they are socially polyandrous, which means multiple males will offer food to one female in the nest. So do you want to look at this species as, well, I just want a pair, or do I want several males and a female? That's going to provide them with the best natural behaviors and social settings, which again is best for their welfare and their enrichment. So those are things to consider when you're doing the research is how many of these birds do we have? How big is that social network or that flock that they're going to have? They do forage in large groups up in the canopy, so hanging enrichment high up in the exhibit or the habitat may be your best bet. That's something to give them, again, the options of climbing up high from where they normally would stay kind of lowland and mid-story. But if the enrichment or the food items are up high, that is providing them with the opportunity to uh, present them with an opportunity to do natural behavior as part of their enrichment plan. So those are all things just to consider, and it's kind of, you'll see similar things, but we're touch on different species here. The next slide is just kind of it was a beautiful shot of the islands where these birds are from. Um, but just a list of certain food types that they eat. Obviously, we probably all have access to figs, bananas, papaya, other fruits and seeds. Um, Flower blooms are something we may not have access to. One, because we might not have ones that are nutritionally or palatable to the animal, or two, they may be toxic. So studying up on what they eat out in the wild allows you to kind of source their diet. And if you're using diet and food as enrichment, it's good to know what we have as an analog wherever you may be in captivity or in your facility. All right. So our next species, we're going to talk a little about the hyacinth macaw, the largest macaw out there from South America. These guys are a very beautiful, big, large blue bird, very distinct and recognizable from most other macaw species. Uh, Just a little information about them. We all know they're the largest species from rainforests in Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and so forth. They are tropical lowland and palm savanna residents. They are dependent on specific palm species. Now, again, this goes back to we may not have that access to that palm species outside of their natural habitat, so we need to find a comfortable analog or something that is uh, we can utilize as a food item that is good for them here or wherever you may be that you're keeping these at. Unlike the Moluccan that we just saw, these guys forage on the ground for a lot of fallen fruit. So an enrichment item may be something hidden under a box or a paper towel or newspapers or even leaf litter, allowing them to forage and clamber around on the ground. It's not to say they won't take food from the trees as well, but this is something research has seen them do in the wild. Um, and it's something we can utilize in everyday enrichment for our animals that we're taking care of. Obviously, cavity nester again, so allowing them to excavate nests in hollow logs, palm trees, things of that nature are going to be ways to enrich them for that breeding aspect. Loud vocalizations, again, if you've ever worked with them, very, 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 very loud animals, so something to consider as well too. They have communal roosts, so not a species you'd want to keep alone if you're trying to mimic something that they have in their natural behavior. Um, or natural environment, you're going to look at a group of birds or a flock of them as well too. If they are kept alone, there are, like we mentioned before, the considerations for species like that. They are going to require a large amount of work and enrichment in order to keep them mentally healthy if they're not being kept with other birds. And that's not to say that you can just throw a whole bunch of hyacinth macaws together and they'll get along. You do have to look at the individuals. You have to look at um, whether their individual personalities will get along. We have tried certain hyacinths here to get along well, and they just don't seem to work out. They don't really care for each other, or they annoy each other too much. But it's something to look at from their natural standpoint, but also the individual as well. All right. Next up, maybe. All right. So we're going to talk about the collared lory. This is a popular species in a lot of aviaries, walk-through aviaries, as well as feeding opportunities. This is a smaller parrot, the smaller relative of these parrots than the hyacinth and the Moluccan. So obviously space is something to consider as well too. These are native native birds to Fiji, the island of Fiji. They're in forested areas, wetter areas, also tree-lined streets. So another bird that is kind of habitat generalist, where they will hang out near um, where human populations are, as well as deep inside the forest. I added the wetter areas in there as well because that is something you could consider as an enrichment. Do you have a misting system? Do you have a light hose that you could spray them down with, or a fogger? A cloud forest fog system, things like that. So keeping them a little moist could be, or a lot of rainfall could be a way to enrich this particular species. Now they are movement based on blooming of different trees seasonally. So they actually travel in small groups around the island from place to place during seasons when particular fruits are in bloom. And that's something you could utilize for enrichment, is maybe having particular food items during a particular season hidden in different areas of the habitat so that they have to travel. Obviously, nobody has a habitat the size of the island of Fiji. Um, if you do, let me know. That'd be great. But just utilizing the habitat you have for them to explore and move about it would be an ideal enrichment for them based off of a natural behavior that they have. One of the interesting things I found about these guys is we talk a lot about the cavity nesters, how they utilize the holes in trees or excavate them themselves. They've actually been found nesting inside of rotting coconuts. So if you have this species, a coconut shell or coconut shells could be something that they're very much used to and something that they could utilize in their daily enrichment. So it's things like that, as you do the research, you'll find these small little nuggets of knowledge that help you out and say, hey, that's a great idea that inspired me to try to something else because somebody had observed this in the wild. Let me see if I can replicate that in captivity. And I think that's a big reason why learning natural history on these on specific species that you're working with is very important in that sense. Let's see. Yep. Okay. So moving right along to our last species. Another popular bird in a lot of zoological collections is the palm cockatoo. This is a beautiful animal from Australia and New Guinea, obviously distinct from all other cockatoos in its fully dark feathers and that red flush face, that beautiful crest on the top of its head there. These are the largest of the cockatoo species, of the cockatoo family. Huge, large beak there. You can see just looking at them. That's great for cracking open nuts and seeds or larger nuts. So those are things to consider as far as their food items. So talk a little bit about their information. They are from Australia, New Guinea, and Western Papuan. Um, this is a little shot of New Guinea here, part of their forest. All these pictures that I added to it are from the actual the locales where you could find these birds here. They are found up in the tallest parts of the forest. If anybody's ever worked with them, they like to be up very, very high. So your high perching is something you're going to look at for these animals. Unlike the other ones we've talked about so far, these guys do have territorial pairs. They will forage in small groups throughout the day when there's trees fruiting of a particular kind that they like. But after the morning foraging, they separate off to their own territories. And I have this in quotes here where they are intolerant of others. And that's actually from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology talking about how they deal with their territories. So this is a species where you would only want to house two of them together in a particular area because they are not tolerant of other species or conspecifics sharing the same area. Within their territories, they have multiple nest sites that they use for both breeding as well as their display, and we will talk about their elaborate display in just a little bit. Um, but again, a wide variety of foods that they pluck out of the trees. So these birds spending most of their time up high probably prefer enrichment hanging from higher in the habitat and they have to climb up to get to. Um, a lot of what they do in the display in their displays as well is going to be in cleared areas. So where you have a canopy of a lot of green and vegetation, they're looking for snags, dead logs that are not growing, usually hollow, and we'll talk about why in just a second here. Um, so those are items to consider for not just the enrichment, but the furniture to mimic again their natural habitat as best as possible. Um, so one of the things with these guys we talked a little bit about or kind of glanced on was that uh, they have a very elaborate displays within their territory. I got a video up next. Hopefully, it'll work out without commercials on YouTube, showing what they do. But this is something that you can utilize in your husbandry, your enrichment is allowing them um, to act on these behaviors and utilize what they do out in the wild. So here's a nice, all right, we're going to jump right into it and I will be quiet and allow you to listen. All right. So that's a neat video and displaying, and it's going to want to play again. A variety of things that you could provide as far as your enrichment programs go. You see that they kind of have a choice of what particular instruments they want to use for their drumming, rocks, sticks, even sometimes larger nuts. So you're providing with those options allows them to perform a natural behavior and keep their mental health going fairly well. Um, if anybody has worked with this species before, they also have a habit of sticking their head into a hollow log and screaming. So providing them with a very auditory enrichment is something that is exciting for them. But you can see they have quite a variety of opportunities you have when you're looking at natural history of an animal to inspire you for enriching them. And this goes across taxa, not just Psittacines. You can work this into any avian species or group that you are looking at, studying their natural behavior and understanding what behaviors you're wanting to see, what behaviors are the most psychologically valued for that animal, are going to be extremely important when you're planning your enrichment and making your enrichment or bringing up new enrichment ideas as well too. So that's the reason why I think it's very important that we look at natural history and not forget about it, as well as a great way to inspire people to find new ideas, especially with citizens or highly intelligent animals who need complex enrichment or constantly changing things. We once you start doing the same thing every day, the same time every day, it becomes routine. It's no longer enrichment. So it's always good to have inspiration of new ideas for your animals. So here, just real quick, is a couple of examples. I'm not going to go through talk through the whole list of some items from wood, paper to plastic that are actually usable. The one caveat I would suggest with plastic is making sure that um, that's not something you leave unattended overnight or for a few days. If it's something that can splinter or break off, pieces they can choke on, you want to make sure that you are removing that or being with them and doing observations while they're utilizing that enrichment item. Um, it's not uh, they're not a no-no item, but obviously bigger, larger plastic items that are harder to crush. We've actually found that some of the items that are made for larger chewing mammals work well for bigger parrot species as well, just because they're harder to destroy, harder to take off in small pieces, and that's something you want to avoid. But other things like paper and wood can usually stay a little while longer as long as it's not in there for too long and rots or anything like that. You know, obviously, one of the things I always suggest with my team is um, don't put out enrichment that you're not willing to clean up. So don't put out a whole phone book with a cockatoo, let it tear it apart and leave it for someone else to clean up. So if you're in one of those situations, just be mindful of things like that. I think I have one or two more slides and just a couple of no-nos, things to avoid, things that might be toxic. Anything that has loops, string, ropes, as long as it's not loose, that they can't get their beaks, tongues, toes, wings, or face caught in it, making sure that those things are nice and tight. Um, Key rings that that could have potential places for them again to get their tongues or feet caught in, but also because of certain metals, copper, zinc, galvanized metal, are things you want to avoid. Lead, ink, pencils are also avoidable. Paint, I know some people do paint with their parrots as well too, but you just want to make sure that that paint is not being ingested or they're not covered in that paint. It's not getting in their eyes or nostrils or anything like that. Treated wood, any wood that's treated for insects or to preserve the wood, those chemicals are no good for them. And then now it says items for outside, no perching. Obviously, we need to perch for them, but that I'm going to throw the caveat of use caution. If you want to use natural perching that you collect from outside, just make sure that one, you're not bringing in anything, insects, mold, fungus from the outside. And there are ways, I believe somebody yesterday talked about baking them, freezing them is another option as well too. Don't take that as absolutely don't use things from the outside as your enrichment or your perching or furniture, but just use your caution, use your best judgment. If you have a facilities SOP on utilizing perching from the outside, follow that to the best of ability or consult your veterinarian. But just, be cautious when you use certain items from around here. And I believe that is it. Once again, I want to thank you all and thank you USDA for allowing me to be here and talk to you about a group of animals I am, even in my 20 years of experience working with birds, not the most comfortable with, but I appreciate your time. And any questions? But before you do, I want to leave you with one of the probably the most enriched and famous birds we know. If
So,
you're not
what
familiar
are
with,
you gonna ask the wizard for, Pixel?
Well, I'm not sure
it
he's
is
such a.
Oh,
Iggy Pop,
oh, I want him to give
Iggy
me
Pop's
all.
cockatoo.
Don't you know about the bird?
Just a
Everybody
very happy
knows
bird.
that the bird is the word.
All right, once again, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and hope you all enjoyed this.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We do have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
Real quick. So at my facility, we do not intend to breed and are actively discouraging any breeding behaviors, but it seems like many of the enrichment items trigger it and can be associated with it. Do you have any tips how to provide enrichment without triggering breeding behaviors?
Um, I guess it would kind of depend on a few things. One, the species that you're working with. Two, the number of, are these singly housed or are they within a group where there's an opportunity to breed? But I would definitely avoid things like nest boxes, nesting material. And this is all stuff that you would need to find out what species would normally use, where they would nest. Again, studying that natural behavior. Um, I would probably look at, not, your food items maybe being offered inside a feeder or a puzzle feeder or something and not really being hand fed, as sometimes these parrots will pass food amongst each other as a bonding situation. And I know it's kind of a tough line because you want to be able to bond with the animal as well, but you don't want to be seen as a potential mate. So it really is kind of finding the information about the species that you're working with, but also understanding the individual, and then avoiding using things that might be seen as a courtship display, courtship behaviors, or any way for for them to interpret them as you as a potential mate in breeding, would probably be the best way to go. But yeah, it would definitely benefit you to learn as much as you can about the breeding behavior of that species, and then try to avoid those behaviors.
Okay, thank you. Next question for you. With paint now not wanting to be used with birds, how do we seal any wood in an enclosure since it is required?
Um, well, again, this list of what I have here, paint, it's if you're using it for sealing certain things, just check with your veterinarian or your medical staff and make sure that what you're using is not something toxic that can be picked at over time. Something once it's dried is okay for the animal to be around. Providing that animal with enough other enrichment and choices, that distraction thing I had on one of the slides, to not chew in that corner and chew on other items within the habitat, would be a way to go. But if you're using something as a sealant, you paint it, I would make sure that the animal doesn't have access to that area until it is fully dried. And again, whatever you're using, make sure that you're clearing that with your veterinarian staff and your medical staff, and that it is approved once it's dried. Most of that stuff can be okay. But I don't want to sit here and list a bunch of different sealants until you've talked with your medical staff.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Why do you suggest avoiding copper enrichment?
There are certain metals like copper can flake off, and ingestion can be can have some issues with the bird. There's some copper was one of those things where it has been talked about, but if it's copper plated, those flakes can actually be ingested. And I don't know off the top of my head, I'm not a veterinarian, that it is a toxicity, but there are certain metals that can be toxic to the animals. So it's just something that you'd probably want to avoid long term as far as ingesting things.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you for that presentation.